Have you ever stood amidst a storm, feeling the raw power of the wind and the roar of the thunder? Have you felt that electric tension in the air just before the heavens break open, a charged stillness that signals a release of immense energy? Now, imagine something infinitely more terrifying: absolute silence. Not the peaceful quiet of an early morning, but a heavy, suffocating silence, the sound of an entire cosmos holding its breath. This was the scene that enveloped the hill of Golgotha at the 6th hour. If your eyes could pierce the veil of the material world, if your soul could sense the vibrations more subtle than sound, you would realize a terrifying truth. All of creation, from the most distant, spiraling galaxies to the motes of dust at a Roman soldier's feet, had fallen silent. They say the sky turned dark, an unnatural night swallowing the midday sun. But what if I told you that this darkness was not a shroud to hide God's shame? What if it was the stage, deliberately set for the final act of a drama, whose script was written in the language of stars before time began? Every black cloud that gathered was not a harbinger of nature's wrath, but the velvet curtains of a cosmic theater, slowly drawing closed in preparation for a truth about to be unveiled. A truth that would shake the very foundations of heaven and hell, a truth that would redefine the meaning of power and victory. Upon that barren hill, amidst the sickening crack of the whip, the discordant clang of hammer against iron, and the venomous hiss of mockery, there was another silence, one even more profound. It was the silence of the man hanging on the wood. His lips were cracked, his chest heaved with the agonizing effort of each breath, yet from him came no curse, no plea for deliverance. His silence was not the resignation of a victim, but the focused stillness of a master strategist staring into the eyes of his opponent, knowing that the next move would decide the fate of a game that had spanned millennia. Heaven was not silent in its helplessness. It was silent in its absolute obedience. This was the silence of an elite army, swords drawn, awaiting the final command from its general. This was the silence of a master hunter, patiently waiting for the most arrogant prey in all of creation to step into the center of a perfectly laid trap. Look closer. Feel it. This thick atmosphere is not merely the Judean heat. It is a spiritual pressure, the tension between two opposing realities about to collide. This is not the story of a dying god. This is the story of a king setting a trap. And the bait was his own broken body. The real war was not being fought on the ground, but in every faltering beat of his heart, in every moment he refused to summon his legions. Each second of his silence was another link being forged in the chain that would soon bind the enemy. Hold your breath with the universe, for the curtain is about to rise, and what you are about to witness will change everything you thought you knew about light, darkness, and the true cost of salvation. In the unseen dimension that existed parallel to the dusty hill, where the laws of physics yield to the principles of will and power, Lucifer sat upon a throne. This throne was not forged from gold or silver, but was woven from the very threads of fear, despair, and the fallen pride of humanity throughout the ages. He did not roar in triumph or celebrate with boisterous glee. He simply sat, chin resting on his hand, and smiled. It was a cold, self-satisfied smile, one that had been perfected over millennia of intellectual warfare with the Creator. It was the smile of a grandmaster of chess who believes he has finally cornered his opponent's king. Ever since the judgment that echoed in the Garden of Eden, the prophecy of a seed of the woman who would come to crush his head, Lucifer had been watching, waiting. He observed the flow of human history like a hawk circling a desert. He orchestrated the rise and fall of empires, whispered sweet temptations into the ears of kings and queens, ignited fratricidal wars, and planted seeds of doubt in the hearts of prophets. All of those moves, those intricate schemes spanning thousands of years, had led to this magnificent spectacle. The anointed one of God, the Word made flesh, hanging like the vilest of criminals, rejected and spat upon by the very creatures he had come to save. For him, This was the irreversible checkmate. To guarantee his absolute victory, Lucifer had focused his power to create a masterpiece of destruction, a field of spiritual interference that enveloped the cross. Imagine it as a storm of chaotic energy, a wall of cosmic static woven from deceit, hatred, and pain. Its purpose was diabolically precise: to sever, or at least dampen, the sacred communion between the Son and the Father. He believed that if he could isolate Jesus in the fullest agony of his humanity, drown him in a feeling of utter abandonment, the word would finally break. He would utter a curse, a single word of resentful blame, and in that instant the holy covenant would shatter into dust. He was savoring the symphony of destruction he himself had composed. Each of Jesus's groans was a sweet melody to his ears. Every drop of blood and sweat was a cool stream for his pride. He had calculated every possibility, anticipated every move. He had turned God's love into a weapon against him. He had twisted humanity's free will into the instrument of their Creator's execution. He believed he was witnessing the final chapter of the story of creation, and he was the one writing the ending. But in his blinding arrogance, Lucifer was oblivious to the fact that he was not the conductor. He was merely a single discordant note in a symphony far grander and more complex, a symphony whose crescendo had only just begun. On the very edge of that interference field, where reality itself bent and warped under the pressure of the cosmic confrontation, two immense beings stood guard like pillars of eternity. Any lesser demon that strayed too close felt its very essence recoiled in pure primal terror at their presence. The first was Michael the Archangel, commander of the heavenly host. But today he was not clad in his usual radiant golden armor that could outshine the sun. Instead, his war gear seemed to absorb all light around it, taking on a blackness as deep as the void between galaxies. It reflected nothing, because it was containing a terrible, constrained power. Every one of his spiritual muscles was tensed like a bowstring drawn to its limit. His famous sword, which had once swept a third of the stars from heaven, remained sheathed. But if one could listen with a spiritual ear, they could hear a low, humming vibration emanating from it, the growl of a chained beast yearning for the release of devastation. Michael's role today was not to attack. His task was infinitely more difficult: to hold the perimeter. He and the millions of the angelic host under his command were not arrayed for an assault. They were forming an invisible wall of energy, a perfect net of containment around the entire area. The purpose of this wall was not to protect Jesus from his tormentors. That was a part of the plan he was forbidden to interfere with. No, its purpose was to ensure that when the final trap was sprung, not a single entity from hell, from the lowliest imp to Lucifer himself, could escape the consequences. They were not protectors. They were the wardens of a prison that was about to be activated. Beside Michael stood a presence of a completely different nature, yet no less formidable. This was Uriel, the fire of God, the keeper of sacred mysteries. He did not resemble a warrior, but a living, burning library, a son of knowledge. He wore no armor, but a robe woven from starlight. In his eyes there was no fury, only infinite focus, as if he were reading a blueprint of unimaginable complexity. His eyes held the very design of the universe, and, more importantly, the detailed schematics of this very trap, a plan drafted before the first star was ignited. Uriel was not watching the battle with emotion. He was cross-referencing. Every single detail, every jeer from the crowd, every shallow breath of the Christ, every bead of sweat on his brow was being compared by him against an ancient celestial scroll. He was ensuring that every event, no matter how small, unfolded perfectly at the right time, in the right sequence. He was the quality control manager of the plan of salvation. They were not suffering, passive spectators. They were executors, carrying out the most critical mission in the history of creation with absolute precision and discipline. Their silence was more terrifying than any battle cry. Why does he not call them The question echoed not only in the bewildered minds of the disciples huddled at a distance, but it was also a confused whisper among both the angels waiting with swords drawn and the demons gloating at the spectacle. They knew the power this man possessed. They had seen him command a raging storm into silence, heal the sick with a mere touch, and send a legion of demons fleeing in terror. They knew that with a single thought, Michael would tear the sky asunder and turn the hill of Golgotha into a sea of holy fire. With a single nod, Uriel would incinerate the Roman cohort into fine ash with a beam of pure truth. The power to end this agony, to annihilate his tormentors, was entirely his to command. Yet Jesus remained silent, hanging between heaven and earth, his body a testament to suffering. And it was this very silence, this restraint, that was the most terrifying power being deployed on the battlefield. Every second that he refused to unleash his omnipotence was another link being added to the invisible cage that was slowly closing around Lucifer. The enemy, in his short-sightedness, was drunk on his apparent helplessness. He saw this endurance as a sign of defeat, a proof that his interference field was working, that the Son had truly been forsaken by the Father. He was incapable of grasping the deeper truth, that this very restraint was the ultimate weapon. It was like a master fisherman. When the great shark takes the bait, the fisherman does not immediately yank the line. He lets the line go slack, allowing the beast to struggle, letting it believe it is free, that it is winning. The more the shark thrashes and pulls, the more line the fisherman releases, luring it further out, tiring it, all while the hook sets deeper and deeper into its jaw. Jesus' silence was the act of letting the line go slack. It was drawing Lucifer deeper into his illusion of victory, making him more arrogant, more blind to the true nature of the confrontation. He thought he was witnessing the failure of God, when in fact he was being maneuvered into the perfect position, right at the epicenter of the cross, where the trap would be triggered with maximum effect. This was the greatest paradox of the cosmos, a truth Lucifer's intellect could never comprehend. The King of the universe was achieving victory not by unleashing his incomparable power, but by chaining it in an act of absolute love and obedience. He was demonstrating that enduring love is stronger than destructive power, that sacrifice is sharper than Michael's sword. He was not just dying for humanity. He was teaching the entire created order a lesson about the true nature of authority. And in his silence, the trap was drawing ever tighter. And then it happened. Not with a cataclysmic explosion or the arrival of angelic legions. It happened in a small, almost unnoticeable moment amidst the chaos. A Roman soldier, in an act of casual cruelty, shoved the crown of thorns deeper onto Jesus' head with the butt of his spear. A long, sharp thorn pierced the skin of his temple. A single dark red drop of blood welled up, thick and viscous, on his torn flesh. And then it fell. In the moment that drop of blood left the body of the Christ, time itself seemed to slow to a crawl. To the profane eyes of the soldiers and the crowd, it was just a drop of blood, another sign of agony and impending death. But in the spiritual realm, an event of cosmic significance had just occurred. That drop did not fall like ordinary liquid. It radiated an inner light, a glorious halo that only celestial eyes could see. It was not the fluid of a life draining away. It was a liquid sun, a distilled essence of primordial creation, carrying within it the very DNA of the Creator. It contained the entire covenant, every promise, all the love of God, condensed into a single, potent entity. When it touched the dry, cracked earth of Golgotha, there was no sound. Yet the entire universe shuddered on its foundations. The angels in Michael's perimeter felt a shockwave run up their spiritual spines. Uriel gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, his eyes glowing with confirmation. The drop of blood was not passively absorbed by the ground. It began to write. Like a drop of divine ink on an invisible page, it began to rewrite the spiritual laws of the earth. laws that had been twisted and corrupted by sin since the garden. It was a divine virus, a sacred piece of code being injected into the very operating system of the fallen world. Lucifer's power, which was based on lies and death, was not being attacked head-on. It was being nullified from the ground up at the most fundamental level of reality. That drop of blood was a cosmic antibody, beginning to neutralize the venom of the ancient serpent. Every subsequent drop that fell from his hands, his feet, and his side was no longer a symbol of defeat, but a new character being added to the universal covenant. A code was being written, a language that only heaven could fully understand. But hell, they were beginning to feel it, not with their minds, but with a growing, instinctual dread. They felt the ground beneath them shifting, the rules they had relied upon to govern being rewritten before their very eyes. They did not know what was coming, but they knew that their dominion was about to end. The catalyst had been released, and the chain reaction was now irreversible. As soon as the first drop of blood soaked into the soil and began its reprogramming mission, a subtle but profound change came over Uriel. He remained physically still, a mountain of quiet intensity, but within him, the fire of God he carried began to burn with a new purpose. The blueprint in his mind, which had been a static theoretical plan, was now activated. Like an architect watching the first foundation stone of his great cathedral being laid, his eyes blazed with living comprehension. The light that began to emanate from Uriel was not the warm, comforting glow of a candle in the night. It was an analytical beam, a cold, sharp light of absolute truth. This light began to shine into Lucifer's field of spiritual interference, not to destroy it with brute force, but to expose it. Like an X-ray passing through a body to reveal the skeletal structure within, Uriel's light pierced Lucifer's storm of lies and revealed its true nature, a hollow construct, a paper tiger built entirely on fear and illusion. For the first time since the rebellion, the high-ranking entities in Lucifer's hierarchy, the dukes and princes of hell, beings who were once radiant angels, began to see the cracks in their master's power. They had always believed Lucifer's might was a genuine force, that his kingdom was built on a solid foundation of opposition. But now, under Uriel's undeniable light, they saw that the storm they were helping to sustain was, in reality, a fragile wall of smoke and mirrors. They saw that their power was not a true force in itself, but merely the absence of light, just as cold is merely the absence of heat. Their confidence, forged over millennia, began to tremble. An earthquake of revelation, a tremor of truth, spread through the ranks of hell. The lesser imps at the bottom of the hierarchy felt only a vague dread, an urge to flee without knowing why. But the more intelligent ones, those closer to Lucifer's throne, began to understand. They didn't grasp the whole plan, but they understood one fundamental thing. They had been deceived. Not by God, but by their own leader. Lucifer had promised them victory and power, but the very foundation upon which he built his kingdom was shamefully weak. They did not understand exactly what was happening, but a primal fear, a fear of meaninglessness, a fear they thought they had long since abandoned, began to creep into their minds. Their plan, their seemingly perfect plan, had a fatal flaw. And that flaw, illuminated by the light of Uriel and catalyzed by the blood of the Christ, was beginning to make everything crumble from within. Lucifer felt the change more acutely than any other. He felt it like a conductor feels a single musician playing out of tune, ruining the entire symphony. The trembling in his ranks, the confusion in the eyes of his closest lieutenants, and above all, the shift in the very fabric of the masterpiece he had created. The smile vanished from his lips. The victory he had felt within his grasp now tasted bitter, like ash. His field of spiritual interference, his pride and joy, his ultimate weapon, was turning against him. It no longer obeyed his will with absolute fidelity. The blood of the Christ was not just slowly neutralizing it, it was transforming it. Like a drop of blue dye falling into a glass of red water, the sacred blood was spreading, not destroying the red but blending with it, turning it into a deep, alien purple. His field of chaotic energy was being restructured at a spiritual molecular level. Deceit was being reordered by truth. In a desperate gambit, Lucifer tried to intensify his power. He poured more hatred, more pride, more of humanity's suffering into the storm, hoping to overwhelm and extinguish the transformation. But the more he pushed, the faster the change occurred. It was like pouring gasoline on a fire he did not control. Every wave of malice he unleashed was absorbed by the sacred blood, analyzed and repurposed, woven into the new structure. He had built a weapon to isolate the Christ from the Father, but now that very weapon was being reshaped, honed into a cosmic optical lens, preparing to magnify something he could not begin to imagine. Confusion, an emotion he had not experienced since the moment he was cast from heaven, flickered in the fallen morning star's eyes. He looked up at the dying man on the cross, and for the first time, he did not see a victim. He saw an adversary he had fatally underestimated. He had played chess with the Creator for millennia, thinking he had learned every move, every strategy. He had anticipated the sacrifice. He had planned for it. But he had made a fatal error. He had miscalculated a single variable, but it was the variable upon which everything hinged. The true nature and power of unconditional love. He understood power, dominion, and deception. But he did not understand sacrifice. And that lack of understanding was about to cost him everything. He was staring at the trap, and for the first time, he realized it was not meant for the Christ. It was meant for him. It is finished. The words that came from Jesus' dry, cracked lips were not a sigh of defeat, nor the groan of a dying man. They rang out with a strange authority that transcended physical pain. It was a declaration, a command. It was the cry of the hunter as the prey is finally and irrevocably caught. It was the statement of the artist as he applies the final brushstroke to his masterpiece. It was the last keyword that activated a pre-written program. In the instant that sound faded, in the moment he breathed his last and his head fell to his chest, everything changed. His blood, now thoroughly saturating the patch of earth beneath the cross, had completed the rewriting of the covenant. The code was complete. The trap was sprung. Lucifer's field of interference, the thing he had so carefully constructed, now completely restructured and repurposed by the sacred blood, abruptly reversed its function. From a static wall designed to block and distort, it became a gigantic converging lens, a perfect piece of spiritual optics, and it did not focus the weak sunlight of the earth. No, it reached out, past the heavens, and focused something no fallen creature could possibly endure. The pure, undiluted, unveiled glory of God the Father, streaming directly from his throne. A beam of holy energy, a river of light and absolute truth, shot down with the speed of thought. It passed through the now purified lens, was magnified 1,000-fold, focused to a single point, and fired directly into the heart of hell. At that moment, Michael and the heavenly host ceased their passive containment. Their role shifted. They became conduits, cosmic fiber-optic cables, ensuring that this beam of lie-destroying energy struck every target, illuminated every dark corner of the shadowy realm. Michael's sword was finally unsheathed, not to strike, but to act as a lightning rod, guiding the torrent of light with absolute precision. Hell did not experience an explosion. It experienced something far worse, a total and complete exposure. Every lie, every illusion, every distortion upon which that kingdom was built was instantly melted away by the heat of absolute truth. Thrones made of pride crumbled into dust. Walls built of fear became transparent. Demons were not burned. They were forced to see themselves as they truly were, their emptiness, their ugliness, a twisted parody of what they were created to be. It was a mental torture no physical fire could ever match. and Lucifer stood at the center of it all. The beam struck him, not to annihilate him, but to force him to confront the truth he had denied since the dawn of time, that he was not God's equal. He was a fallen creature, and his rebellion, however grand, was ultimately nothing more than a discordant note in the Creator's symphony. The trap had been sprung, and in the roar of the light, the kingdom of darkness was defeated, not by sword and might, but by truth. In the aftermath of that terrifying storm of light, a strange silence fell over the abyss. Hell was not destroyed, but it was paralyzed, stunned, reeling in the raw truth that had just been exposed. Demons cowered in the shadows, no longer daring to raise their heads. The kingdom of pride was now a land of shame, and into that moment the Spirit of the Christ descended. He did not come as a conquering warrior with sword and shouts of victory. He did not come to trample upon his defeated foe. He came in stillness, like a sower entering a field that has just been plowed by a storm. The light of glory had done the clearing work, and now it was time for the planting. He walked through the corridors of Sheol, where the souls of the dead were held captive. His presence brought not judgment, but a profound peace. Lucifer stood there, amidst his crumbling kingdom, like a statue of obsidian. The light had not destroyed him, but it had stripped him of his most precious possession, his illusion of power. For the first time in his eternal existence, he was utterly silent, with no lie to tell, no mockery to utter. He could only watch, impotent, as the one he hated most walked through his domain. Jesus did not come to fight him. The battle was over. Nor did he come to reclaim the keys of death and Hades. They were not something to be wrestled for, but an authority to be surrendered. He ignored his defeated enemy and proceeded to the very heart of Sheol, the deepest, darkest place, a place where even hope dared not venture. And there he did something no one could have expected. He planted something in the dark soil. It was not a symbolic act. It was a creative one. He planted a seed of light forged from the very essence of his life, love, and sacrifice on the cross. It was the quintessence of the new covenant, the potential for a new creation. He did not come merely to free the captives of the Old Testament, figures like Abraham, Moses, and David who had waited in faith. Their liberation was only a small part of it. His greater mission was to plant a garden in the middle of the enemy's wasteland. He did not just break open the prison doors to let the inmates out. He was building a beachhead of heaven in the very heart of hell. That seed, once planted, would begin a process of transformation from within. It would take root in the darkness, drawing sustenance from despair and turning it into hope. It would grow, and its light would slowly spread, not by destroying the darkness, but by transforming it. This was a long-term strategy of conquest, subtle and unstoppable. He was not just taking back what was lost. He was starting something entirely new, in the one place where it seemed all things had ended. For 3 days, the world of men held its breath. The sealed and guarded tomb was a monument to finality, an apparent victory for order and death over a perceived rebel. But beneath the surface of reality, in the quiet of the earth, the seed was working. It had taken deep root in the spiritual soil, and now it was ready to sprout. The resurrection, when it came on the morning of the first day of the week, was not an escape from death. It was not a spirit fleeing a grave. It was the first flower blooming in the newly planted garden. The stone was not rolled away so that Jesus could get out. It was rolled away so that humanity could look in and see that life had conquered in the very domain of death. Jesus' body, now glorified, was no longer bound by physical laws. It was not just proof that he had defeated death. It was the sign that a new creation had begun. A new order of reality had been born. Light was no longer just shining on the darkness from the outside. It was now rising up from within it. The victory at the cross, therefore, was not a concluding event. It was the beginning of a long campaign, an inverse invasion of light into the realm of shadows. Jesus did not leave the battlefield. He simply changed his method of warfare. He had planted the seed, and now, through his Spirit, he would tend to that garden through his disciples, through his church, through every single person who placed their faith in him. And that story is still unfolding, right here, right now, in your life. Every time a soul, surrounded by the darkness of despair or doubt, finds a flicker of hope, that is another flower blooming in the garden. Every act of selfless love and sacrifice you perform is another seed being planted in the barren soil of this world. Every time you choose forgiveness over hatred, truth over deceit, you are helping to water the garden of the Christ. The trap was sprung 2,000 years ago. The victory is assured, but the symphony of salvation still echoes, and the dawn that sprouted from the darkest place continues to promise a day when that garden will cover the entire earth. The next time you face your own darkness, remember this: you do not fight alone. And the greatest light is not that which dispels the darkness, but that which can sprout from its very heart. For your King is not just a victor, he is a gardener, and he is still at work.